And I wonder if this is a moment to sort of ask Sue to talk about um, from an Indigenous person's point of view, some of those kind of cultural factors that we might be needing to be thinking about, particularly when we're looking at stressors and drivers for emotional, psychological distress and risk-related behaviours.
It's very, very important that we remember that our families need to be involved in this, or if they're coming from the school setting, and being in an ambulance, say, to the hospital, it's important that the families are notified straight away, and information, even if they've got an AEO or a support person in the school who supports this child or mentors this child, they're the ones who should be there if the parents aren't going to be there, first and foremost, because that's the calming influence that particular person will have on the child. So from a cultural view, it's so very, very important that we acknowledge that, both for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, because the anxiety levels go up twofold, even more, and until the family comes on board, and it may not even be a family member. If we can't contact the family, there are other members of the family who actually support that particular person, and they're the ones who need to be there first and foremost. The conversation and communication that goes on between the AEO or the support person or the mentor of that particular student is so very, very important to keep everyone at ease, because then when the parents arrive, they're able to communicate much more freely to the parents and support them in the situation that's happening at the time.
Thanks, Sue. And just from a risk assessment point of view, it's essential to be getting collateral information and to be engaging families and significant others. And that can make a massive difference. When we're thinking about risk assessment or mental health assessment in general, one of our primary principles is care in the least restrictive environment. Hospital wards like Nexus are very useful. They play an important role, but they are also abnormal environments. They are not always the most psychologically or emotionally healthy place for young people to be, or in adult wards, they're not necessarily the most psychologically or emotionally healthy place for adults to be. So if we can work with family systems to create a safe discharge disposition, then that is often our preferred option working in mental health. Obviously, that very much depends on the capacity of a family or significant others to look after a person, but it can make a massive difference. Just to give an example of a young person I worked with when I worked in New Zealand, he was a young Māori man, I think it was about age 16. I saw him in a police station after he smashed up someone's car with a shovel. He was incredibly angry after he found out one of his siblings had been sexually abused. He was very, very shut down. He didn't want to engage with us whatsoever from a mental health assessment point of view. Very angry in the police cells, punching the walls, very tearful, talking about suicide. And I was getting nowhere with this young man. And eventually I just said, look, is there someone that I can contact? Because my options here are to put you in a police car and drive you 2 hours to the mental health admission centre, and you will stay in hospital under the Mental Health Act. But please, is there someone that I can contact on your behalf? And he said, yes, call my auntie. So I called his auntie, and we had maybe 15 people turn up to the police station. The police in New Zealand are fantastic often, maybe not always, but they opened the doors of the cell. These 15 family members walked in. His auntie put her arms around this young man. He just fell into her arms in floods of tears. And from that moment on, our assessment opened up. We were able to make a very good discharge plan with this family, who were very, very willing and able to support this young guy. And he went home with his family from the police station, and we avoided a 2-hour drive to the admission centre, which probably wouldn't have been that helpful for him if that had happened anyway. So I guess that's just a case example to illustrate the importance of involving family.
Aboriginal children and young people and their families that have a Nexus admission, is there anything in particular that Nexus Education are able to offer by way of cultural support?
We're really fortunate to have a strong cultural program that we run on the ward. One of our young teachers is a very proud Indigenous woman, and she runs our Sister Speak program with all of the young female Indigenous patients we have. We also have the wonderful Uncle Perry Fuller, who runs incursions twice a term, and he comes onto the unit and runs a full day workshop for all of the young people, and the staff thoroughly enjoy his yidaki playing, his teaching of art techniques, and his wonderful storytelling. I feel that it's a wonderful program that we run at Nexus.
Sue, are there things, I know that Steve is going to be able to offer lots by way of support strategies for schools for young people after they've had a Nexus admission, but is there specific things that schools should be thinking about, given young people have had that cultural support in Nexus? What should schools be thinking about to keep that going when they come back to school?
Communication between Nexus and also the school is so very, very important when it comes to our kids that are in Nexus, because when they come back, it's important that the schools listen to the kids. That student voice is so very, very important. They need to listen, and also it's very important for the teachers to look at what triggers the student actually has and be very observant of them at all times in those early stages when they're returning to school. If there is an Aboriginal worker or an Aboriginal officer or an Aboriginal SLO or the mentor in the school, it's important that those conversations are had with them so that they know how to respond to the child as well. If that doesn't happen, it falls down a lot, and then the child is overcome and becomes overwhelmed and doesn't make that connection back into school, because they've had that fantastic support at Nexus. So that's one of the great things we need to do with our students that return from Nexus into the school system again, and also making sure that the families know who's supporting them at school. The conversation is so very important. The relationships that they develop along the way are so very, very important for these kids to overcome whatever's happening. The family knowing that there's not just them that need to support them. We can have other people that are out in the community. The schools can connect with AECG, they can connect with the local lands councils to make sure they've got great cultural activities going on in the school, and it's not just relying on what the family has. We have to be strong. We have to make sure that we're listening carefully and know how to go forward with these kids in supporting them along the line. It's a holistic approach, not just one or two people. So that's the way we believe that it should be culturally done. There's so many people out there that can support schools from a cultural perspective and making sure we're doing it the right way.
Thanks, Sue. And I think we think about it in CAMS as it's important to connect with the school counsellor, because that's the psychological resource that sits in the school. And likewise, it's important to connect with staff who are in specific specialised Aboriginal support roles, because that's the cultural expertise that sits in the schools. And I know that Naomi's looking at making sure those staff are included in stakeholder meetings, because we see that they're so important and so valuable to be able to contribute their expertise. When you're looking at this group of professionals all contributing their expertise to support this young person, we need to have that cultural expertise represented on that group and that voice included, so that we can look at a holistic model of support for the child, like you're saying. Yep.
Exactly. The learning and wellbeing team should, if they've got Aboriginal people working within their schools, they're face to face with our students. They know the families quite often as well. So it's so very, very important when these students are back in school that they do have that strong learning and wellbeing team together, looking out for, whatever might trigger this young person again.
I think you raise a really good point, Sue. Look, because you're really talking about the role that people have, and sometimes role or position description or whatever doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for the child and the family or to find the solutions. Oftentimes, I guess, and that's where, leadership and followership are so important. You can be a senior professional in your setting, but the best person to engage with that young person and family is this person, and it's your job to support them to do that. And so leadership sometimes about getting behind the identifying the best person, not taking charge and as well. So it's really, if you have that collaborative lens, like you're describing with, even within your own school setting or team, if you're in a health team, but also, with the family and the young person and, really connecting all of those things. What we're trying to do is often find solutions to problems. And if we connect with young people and families and our whole team, we'll all come up with the answers to those solutions.
Further to what Steve was saying too, I'd just like to add that it's important that we do listen to what the students have to say. That conversation with the students, from an Aboriginal perspective, that conversation with the students and also the family, and developing a very positive, genuine, authentic rapport with them is one of the things that we sort of don't have enough time to do. But I think from a teaching perspective, it's so very, very important that teachers do that. The relationships that we develop with our Aboriginal community is important, because our Aboriginal community actually supports each and every one of the people that are within that community. So if we're listening to everything that's going on and we look at what's happening, look at the triggers that might be going to set this child off, take time to listen to them. Don't think an Aboriginal student is going to reply straight away. They need that little bit of time to process. And if we give them time, then we're going to perhaps have a better outcome. And also just the supports. It's important that our Aboriginal kids have that strong connection with whoever they are, whoever it is that's going to support them in the school. So it's so very, very important, that connection and relationship, as far as we're concerned from a cultural perspective, because it looks then as though everyone is caring for this particular student.
I think just to add to that too, I think you touched on it before, Steve, but just reinforcing that whoever is assigned a role in the school, it needs to be really carefully thought whether they have the capacity or the knowledge or even the understanding to complete that role. Like it doesn't need to be a certain executive or a certain level or hierarchy for certain roles. It's who has first got the willingness, the capacity, the knowledge and the skills to actually carry out that role that's within the plan. And like you said, totally in consultation with the young person. I mean, I'm not saying that they need to make all the decisions, but they certainly need to be having their point of view put across, and then the school can look at, well, this is what they've suggested. How can we either go about that, or what can we do that gets as close as we can to that identified?
Absolutely.
One of the most important things from a cultural thing, as far as the planning is concerned too, is making sure you explain it fully to the parent or the carer, and also to the child, because unless it's explained carefully and then they have a copy of it too, is really important, because the child, that conversation can be had at home to actually support the child as well as when they're at school, so that they're realising that it's coming from all directions and it's supporting them no matter what, and the parents are on board as well, or the carer, whoever it is, because it may be the grandparent, or it could be a cousin, or it could be an aunt or an uncle, who knows. But that's the way our culture is. We're all there to support the child.